Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. Gonna just give it a few moments as people start filtering in from the waiting room. Had some technical difficulties this morning, so I apologize for being a couple minutes past 11:30. I'm just gonna give folks another minute to jump on. All right. Looks like we can get started. Thank you all so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join the Governor Mills's Opioid Response webinar series. I am Madison Barassa. I'm one of the SUD program managers here at the Office of Behavioral Health, working with Gordon Smith, who most of you I'm sure know is the Director of Opioid Response. Gordon sends his appreciation for you all being here today and will join us at the next webinar series. I am also joined with my colleague Richard Freund, who is also another SUD program manager at the Office of Behavioral Health, and of course, Lorena from AdCare, who you all know and love. Today's topic is the best practices in supporting youth and families in recovery, but just want to take a minute before we jump in to note that the next webinar series will be held on November 1st, same time, 11:30 to 12:30. Keep an eye out for the registration notice from AdCare to learn more about what topic we'll hear about in November. Just a quick housekeeping item. If you have any questions, please put those questions in the question and answer box. The chat is open for you all to have discussion, but we won't be monitoring the chat for any questions. So if you have any questions today, please use that Q&A box. If we don't get to all of those questions, we don't get to answer them, AdCare will post them with the answers on the website in the following weeks. We are really lucky to be joined today by Jordana Willers. Ms. Willers is the Youth and Young Adult Training Coordinator for the Institute for Health and Recovery, a statewide organization focused on policy, programs/systems development, training, services, and research. In her role, she provides training, technical assistance, and support for youth and young adult substance use treatment programs, and collaborates with youth serving systems and state agencies across Massachusetts in partnership with the Department of Public Health Bureau of Substance Addiction Services. Like I said, we are really lucky to have Jordana with us today. Really excited for this presentation. So I will just pass it right over to you. Thank you all so much.
Okay, wonderful. I'm just going to share my screen with you. We had some technical difficulties, but I'm gonna fix that right now. So, okay. Hopefully you all can see that.
Yeah, it looks beautiful.
All right, wonderful. And I did just want to say that the technical difficulties were on my end. So if anything happens, I will return, and Lorena will help with the PowerPoint slides. So we'll be all set. All right. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the training. It's my honor to be here today to talk with you about best practices for supporting youth and families in recovery. I'm Jordana Willers. Thank you for the introduction. I am, like she said, I'm a consultant and I'm a full-time trainer in Massachusetts. I'm focused on topics related to youth and young adult substance use treatment, family recovery, mental health, trauma, among other topics. I do work with the full continuum of care for youth and young adults with substance use disorders in Massachusetts. I do trainings and technical assistance for staff in our youth detox, youth and young adult residential treatment programs, recovery high schools, school-based, community-based programs. So I also do trainings for AdCare in Massachusetts every month. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me after the training. My contact information is on the last slide. So speaking of the slides, they will be available to you along with, I believe, a recording of this training. I just wanted to start off by thanking you so much for the important work that you're doing. So as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, to know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived, this is to have succeeded. So thank you so much for helping families and youth in recovery. It makes a huge difference. And I also want to note that the topic of family recovery from addiction can be emotional for many of us, professionally and personally. So please take care of yourselves today. And I'm so honored that you're here. And I hope that there's some things you get from this training today that will help you in your work. So our learning goals for today are to understand the challenges that families face when they're caring for a young person who is struggling with substance use, as well as co-occurring mental health disorders. Um, to also identify some strategies that we can use, best practices to engage and support family members, particularly the parents and caregivers, to help get their loved ones into treatment and recovery. And then also to review family recovery resources that are available in hopefully in your area in Maine, as well as in other states like Massachusetts and nationally. So why focus on the family when we're talking about addiction? We know that the young people are struggling, but the family is often thought of or could be thought of as the forgotten client. So many families are suffering and they also need our support. So, and when I talk about families, it's a very broad definition. I'm including parents, caregivers, grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles, close family friends, anyone who considers themselves close to that loved one struggling. They are all suffering when they care about someone with an addiction. We now understand that addiction is a chronic medical disease and it has huge ripple effects impacting the whole family. The research shows that at least 25% of the US population actually belongs to a family that is affected firsthand by addiction. And those ripple effects are felt far and wide and cause so much distress, so much sadness and isolation and fear. So we really want to help families directly in addition to the clients themselves. Second, we also want to focus on the family because we want to nurture the soil. We want to help create a home environment that will allow young people with substance use disorders to have a better chance of thriving, of getting into treatment, and of maintaining their recovery. So, just to use the metaphor, we can take a struggling plant out of its environment. We can nurture it back to health. For example, a young person, and maybe they go to substance use treatment, detox or residential, something outside the home, and they get lots of support. Like plants get lots of good water and sunlight and, a new pot and all of the good stuff. But if we return the plant back to the soil where it was before and it's too dark or it's too dry, the plant won't have as much chance to thrive and survive. So we want to nurture the soil. We want to support that family so that they can have better outcomes, not only for the youth but for themselves as well. Um, and this will really help. If we can support the family, we can help reduce stigma and distress. We can increase empathy for the young person who is struggling, along with the knowledge and skills that the family can use to really help their loved one get into treatment and maintain recovery and also help themselves. So, the other reason why I think it's so important to focus on the family is because often what we see is an intergenerational cycle of addiction. And when you look at a family tree and substance use disorder, we often see it goes back many generations. So, when parents and caregivers can and family members can get help for the substance use disorder in the older generation, the whole family can recover. And for the young person who may be struggling with addiction, and the parent is also struggling with addiction, when we can support the whole family, we can really break this intergenerational cycle of addiction. So let's talk about some of the challenges that families face when they have a young person with a substance use disorder. If we try to put ourselves in their shoes, we can think of some of these challenges. So let's just start with confusion. So, there's a lot of confusion for parents and for other family members trying to figure out what in the world is going on. Does my child have a problem with drugs or alcohol? Is this just typical teenage behavior? Are they experimenting? Are they going to grow out of it? It's addiction is a complex disease, and its signs and symptoms can be misunderstood or overlooked or hidden from families for a long time before they understand fully the severity of the problem. Even the most educated parents may not fully understand addiction, um, or what to do when their child is struggling. Stigma is another huge challenge that families struggle intensely with. So most parents and caregivers and other, siblings, others, they feel very embarrassed to talk about what's going on. There's so much judgment around this still, even though we've worked so hard to fight the stigma around addiction. We still have a long way to go. Um, Addiction is not what we would call a casserole disease, meaning that, other families aren't typically organizing meal trains or helping out, in the way that they might for a family who has a kid struggling with another disease like cancer, for example. So there's a lot of sadness and anxiety for families. They often feel very depressed, very scared about their child's future, very overwhelmed, and this can lead to tremendous isolation and loneliness. And on top of this, many families have no idea how to navigate the treatment system or to find recovery supports. This information can be hard to find. Hopefully, they know that they can call 211, for example, but a lot of families don't know about levels of care. They don't know what makes a good quality substance use treatment program, when they should get help for their kid, how to find the right program that's covered by health insurance. There's so many, questions around navigating treatment. Other challenges include a family's limited resources, both financially and emotionally. Many family members also have their own challenges that they're dealing with that are unresolved, their own substance use disorder, their own mental health challenges. There may be domestic violence or poverty or other serious health concerns of their own, or other children in the family who are struggling, all of which can prevent them from having the energy and the wherewithal to support their child struggling with addiction. Cultural barriers can be another big hurdle for some families. They may speak a language other than English. They may have religious beliefs that make it difficult to access help. And it's also important to recognize that societal barriers such as racism and homophobia and other forms of discrimination and systemic oppression can prevent families from reaching out. In addition to there being logistical barriers like a lack of transportation to get their child to substance use treatment, or a lack of childcare if there's other kids in the family, to get, that they would need in order to get their kids to appointments. Health insurance is always a challenge for, many families. And then we have this very big challenge of compassion fatigue or secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, burnout, from dealing with their loved one's addiction. So this can present in a variety of ways. And I just want to talk a little bit more in depth about this because secondary trauma is such a huge concern for families dealing with addiction. And this happens when caregivers feel overwhelmingly stressed and traumatized from trying to help their loved one who's suffering. And in fact, families can develop symptoms that are very similar to those of post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. And this includes having physical illnesses, so really experiencing headaches, stomach aches, all kinds of somatic illnesses that can happen, getting sick more often. It can really affect the immune system. In addition, there are often intrusive thoughts. That's a symptom of PTSD, and that can really affect families. Having thoughts throughout the day, obsessing about what is going on with their kid, having nightmares, having flashbacks. In addition to a lot of emotional dysregulation. So, they're really in a hypervigilant state, and their nervous system is on high alert for things that could be happening with their kid. So, they may be overreactive and really struggling with daily life. They may be also feeling numb and emotionally shut down by this experience. There's also another symptom, which is a disrupted sense of self and others in the world in terms of not feeling like they can trust others, not feeling safe, not feeling connected, not feeling in control. So all of this is very traumatic, and we want to support families around this. And also, just just as a reminder around trauma and recovery from trauma, it's always possible, as is recovery from addiction. So you may have heard of this Japanese art form called kintsukuroi, which is about taking broken pottery and then repairing it with gold or silver filament. And it's a good metaphor for recovery from trauma, because once this is, once this pottery is fixed, it's actually considered even more beautiful and valuable than it was before it was broken. And like, this metaphor, families can recover from the trauma of addiction. They can become resilient. They can emotionally heal. And often they can also experience post-traumatic growth, which is when people can find deeper psychological and spiritual meaning in their lives after experiencing trauma, and can go on to, really have even healthier and more fulfilling lives than before, the trauma. So there is so much hope for recovery. Um, and that is one of the key messages that I think is really important to share with families that you work with. So I just have a whole bunch of messages that I think would be really wonderful if you can, in your work with families, if you can share these. So the first is really about hope. There's always hope for recovery from addiction. You can really help families understand that it is a chronic progressive disease, but the treatment and recovery work. Please let families also know that it's not their fault. Addiction is not their fault. There's no shame or blame here. That really doesn't help anyone. It only perpetuates pain and suffering. And, when we work with families, we really want to be in a very empathetic and non-judgmental place for healing to occur. So, and it is a chronic disease. So we want to remind them it's not their fault. Also, helping them, this is an area of education, helping them understand relapse, that this is a relapsing disease. So relapses offer an opportunity for families to learn about the triggers that young person was experiencing, and to build in more supports moving forward. Families can also learn how to prepare for relapse by taking harm reduction measures, which we will discuss in this training a little bit later, and also having a safety plan in place. It's also really important for families to understand the intersection between mental health trauma and addiction, since this overlap is extremely common for youth and young adults, as well as for people of all ages who do have substance use disorders. So helping families learn about how to support the holistic healing of their child through integrated treatment is important too. And we want to let families know that recovery takes time. There are no quick fixes with recovery. It's a long-term process. And it is a disease that requires continuous monitoring over the course of one's life. But it is important for them to know that, just going to detox or getting, that's not going to be enough, that it's a long-term process. And sending the message to families that there are many pathways to recovery is also important. So whether it's clinical treatment or peer support, 12-step meetings, harm reduction, medications for recovery, abstinence, least in, sort of outpatient that services that are not as intensive as the more intensive residential programs. There's a lot of choices along the way that people can make and can find their own pathway toward recovery. We also want to send the message that families are not alone. There are so many other families going through this, and connecting with them is important. Getting support is important, as is focusing on their own self-care, and reminding folks that self-care is not selfish. It means, putting your own oxygen mask on first before helping your loved one. And finally, really encouraging families to keep learning about addiction and recovery. And I will be sharing a whole bunch of resources that you can share with families to help them keep learning, because it is a really complex topic and there's always so much to learn. And that can help families understand and get insight and empathy and their own support and resources. So how can we engage families in the recovery process? We can send these messages, right? They're no longer the forgotten clients. We're now trying to build relationships with them. We're building trust and safety and motivation for change. And I just want to highlight a few key things that we can do to engage families. So it really starts with building that relationship with them with respect and empathy and non-judgment, similar in the ways that we would engage with our clients who are struggling with substance use. For those of you who are familiar with motivational interviewing, you can think about using motivational interviewing principles with families too. We can work with them in a therapeutic alliance. We can recognize their expertise, that they are the experts in their family, that, and really honoring their autonomy in a respectful and caring way, developing trust with them. And then with that relationship, then we can really work with them to help them get some more education, some more insight around substance use disorders, how they develop, the risks of early use, the genetic component, that trifecta between substance use, mental health, and trauma, and how common it is for people who are in so much emotional pain to turn to substances to cope. You can help them get educated about the neurobiology of addiction, how it hijacks the brain, how treatment works, how to access quality treatment, and how families can help get their loved ones in treatment. And we'll talk a lot more about that in this training. We can also support family recovery by including families in our treatment and recovery efforts when possible. So I think it's on the next slide. I'm going to share some best practices that you can use in your program to increase family involvement. We also, of course, want to help families to be able to access treatment and recovery support. So making those referrals, being able to develop the skills that are needed to support their loved ones and themselves during this difficult time. And then, really sharing those helpful and available resources that we have to support them and their loved ones. So here are some recommendations that I have for providers to involve families in the recovery process. These are best practice guidelines that were developed in Massachusetts by the Bureau of Substance Addiction Services for the programs that they license. And I have sort of created the Cliff Notes version of that, those best practice guidance. So, one thing that your program can do is to develop a family recovery resource guide, even if it's just a one-pager with key resources, so that it can be shared with all families of the clients that you serve. So, the earlier that families can get this information, the sooner that they can connect with these resources. And those resources could be really essential for their recovery and that of their loved one. Also, supporting staff training is really important around family recovery. So, just like this training that you're in today, feel free to share this with your staff, other staff in your program, support more trainings on family recovery. And also, it's important for the staff and programs to learn how to work with families, how to respond to calls that they might receive from family members in a compassionate, trauma-informed way. So really making sure that staff know which family recovery resources are helpful to share, and being able to do that by phone, by email, in person. If at all possible, I also recommend that you consider adding family recovery programming to what your organization offers. I know some of you are already doing this, but if not, really consider what you can do to support families. Whether that means including them in family team meetings, in counseling sessions, offering a family support group on site or virtually, maybe adding in some more family-friendly activities and events and opportunities for families to celebrate their child's recovery as well as their own healing. You could offer family-friendly graduation ceremonies and work closely with families on aftercare planning. I also recommend that all clients, regardless of their age, be given family recovery resources as well, directly. And so one way to do this is to include like a family recovery resource guide in the client policy manual that they would receive at admission, so that they can share these resources with their families too. And I know not all clients are, close with their families, but just in case, it's good to have, and there may be chosen people in their lives that they would want to support them, and they can share those resources with them. An important way to help families in recovery is to help them understand how to navigate the treatment system, which we mentioned earlier, and in particular, how to navigate what's available for youth and young adults. So This will help them be better prepared to support their loved one, to find a high quality program at the level of care that's needed. And that may be more intensive or least intensive. But really, we want to help families know what to look for when it comes to finding a high quality program, such as whether or not it's licensed, whether or not they offer developmentally appropriate services given their child's age, if they treat co-occurring disorders, if they support families. There are some good guides for families around navigating the treatment system. I've put the links to some of those on a slide at the end of the training with additional resources. So you'll be able to find that, find those there. You can also help families navigate how to find peer recovery supports for their loved ones, in addition to treatment. So that includes peer recovery support groups, peer recovery centers, recovery coaching, and other options that may offer peer recovery supports. So we don't have time today to go into how to find treatment, what's available specifically for youth, but a good start is 211 in Maine. So, what I'd really love for you all to have is a toolbox of skills that, and tools that you can share with families. So here are some concrete tools that you can share when families are caring for a young person with a substance use disorder. These include harm reduction, best practices for families to get loved ones into treatment, such as CRAFT and the invitation to change approach, peer recovery support resources for families are also really important, as well as parent coaching, outpatient family services, and educational resources to help families continue learning about recovery from addiction, as well as their own parallel process of growth and healing. And, you can actually even use this like a checklist when you're working with families. Make sure that you talk with them about all of these areas, not to overwhelm them, but over time, make sure that they have all of these resources or include them in that family resource guide that I was recommending. These are all really important. So first and foremost, we want to help families keep loved ones alive and to reduce the harms associated with addiction, including reducing injuries and illnesses and preventing death due to overdose. In this day and age where fentanyl is so widely mixed in with a variety of substances that young people are using, we truly need to educate all families on how to reverse an opioid overdose. Fentanyl, as you may know, it's a very powerful synthetic opioid that's led to a huge increase in fatal overdoses among teenagers and others with substance use disorders. So please encourage all families to learn how to use naloxone, which is more commonly known by its brand name Narcan. This is the medication that reverses an opioid overdose. Help families learn what to do in an opioid emergency, like call 911, learn rescue breathing, apply that, there are really great ways to learn these skills and also help families know where to get Narcan kits to keep on hand. Another way you can help families is to work with them to create a family safety plan in case of a substance use or mental health crisis with their loved one. Also, please talk with your families about the importance of creating a safe and recovery supportive environment at home for their child. So we talked about nurturing the soil, right? It's important for families to role model not using substances at home if their loved one is struggling with substances or is in recovery. Also, parents should lock up any drugs. Any marijuana, alcohol as well, any potentially dangerous substances such as prescription opioids that may be in the medicine cabinet or maybe over at grandma's in the medicine cabinet. So, those are also important things to talk with families about as harm reduction measures. This is just a slide with some information about organizations in Maine that can help families and providers learn how to access and use Narcan and other harm reduction measures. So you have Get Maine Naloxone, you have options with the liaisons, which is wonderful, Maine access points. Get Naloxone now is a national resource for training on this. All right, so you can check that off. Harm reduction, really important. We also want to talk about the next tool in the toolbox. This is evidence-based models to help families get their loved ones in substance use treatment, and also for families to get help for themselves. So we have CRAFT and another one called Invitation to Change. So CRAFT has been studied extensively. It's considered one of the most effective ways to help families to both reduce a loved one's substance use and engage them in treatment, and also significantly reduce their own pain, anger, and worry, and improve their well-being. So please let all your families know about the CRAFT model and share with them resources that will help them to learn these critical skills. So the skills that are part of CRAFT include understanding why their loved one is using substances and what's triggering the use. Families also learn how to listen to their loved one in such a way that can encourage change more. Families learn how to use positive reinforcement strategies with their loved one to reward the non-substance using behavior, and also how to allow natural consequences to help establish healthy boundaries. CRAFT also helps families prioritize self-care and to learn ways to role model healthy coping skills and self-compassion while improving their own health and well-being. And CRAFT also has some modules on helping families take precautions around violence in the home, and also ways to encourage loved ones to accept help. So it's a really wonderful model. I put some books, the pictures of the book covers on the slide here. These are really helpful resources. And there's other ones. The CRAFT treatment manual just came out last year, so that's great. And the Compassion Antidote is a wonderful book too. So the invitation to change approach is another model that's drawing from CRAFT. It's really, the goal of it is really to help families be able to use the CRAFT model by taking a compassionate, skills-based approach. So they talk about combining science and kindness to reduce shame and stigma and promote recovery. And really what they're doing is integrating motivational interviewing techniques, as well as acceptance and commitment therapy with the CRAFT model to make it more accessible for families, because it can be really hard to do these, to learn these skills and be able to do them. So these are helpful resources as well, and you can actually download each chapter of the book for free at the link here. And I do have a whole slide here on resources, because there are quite a few that have been developed to help families learn the CRAFT model and Invitation to Change. So I'm not from Maine, so I may be missing some things, but I know Maine offers CRAFT support through the Co-occurring Collaborative Serving Maine. They have a brief online course. There's like a $5 fee, but it's focused on understanding CRAFT principles, and can really, I think, help providers understand, how to support families and get some more resources around this. There's also some more in-depth resources out there for families and providers to learn the CRAFT model. So I'll just highlight one that I'm most familiar with, because it's free to use in Massachusetts thanks to funding from the state. So it was also, I'm talking about Allies in Recovery. Allies in Recovery was also the first website that was designed to help families learn how to use CRAFT online. And so there are training videos, there's support groups, there's expert guidance, and I know that they also are contracted with like other states, I think Rhode Island and New Mexico. So I'll just say, like in Massachusetts, we use our zip code and it just opens up the, it's just free to use. So I think there's a fee otherwise, but Allies in Recovery is great. There are other organizations also doing a great job teaching craft skills, including the ones that are listed here. And I do want to highlight the website Helping Families Help, which is designed to maintain, all the different options about how to learn craft and the Invitation to Change. And they also have a list of ongoing groups for families who are using craft. So some of them are meet weekly, some of them are every other week, and families can join anytime to get support around using it. The next tool in our toolbox that I really want to emphasize is peer support groups for family members and parent coaching as well. So please encourage all families to join a peer support group for themselves. So, you may have heard of this idea that addiction is a disease of disconnection and that we heal through connection. So, just like those suffering directly from this disease, it's also so healing and important for families to connect with others who get it, who are going through a similar experience. Peer support groups for families can help break through that isolation. They can feel more empowered. They can have a place to feel all their feelings and get emotional support and stay updated on resources and keep learning about addiction. It can be really life-changing. So please refer families to peer support groups that may be in your area, or if there aren't any in your area, there are plenty that they can connect with virtually. And I have some resources on what those are in a moment. But I also just want to highlight the another option, which is free parent coaching. So this is offered through the Partnership to End Addiction, which is a national organization focused on youth substance use, and they have tons of great information on their website. And they also have trained a bunch of family members who have lived experience in the craft and invitation to change model to work with other parents. So if you call their helpline, they have a 24/7 bilingual helpline. You can ask for a parent coach, and they offer support for a very short term. It's about 5 to 6 weeks, but it can be helpful for families to get a sense of hope, to get connected with resources, to get more grounded in, longer term support. So, all right. So in terms of peer support groups for families, there are quite a number of them in the 12-step model. So, there's Al-Anon, which is for friends and families impacted by a loved one's alcohol use disorder. And they also have Alateen, which is for teenagers who are affected by a loved one's drinking. We have Nar-Anon groups that offer us a network of peer support groups for those who are affected by a loved one's drug use. And I recently learned about the Narrateen. There's not many of them, but there's some online, so that is another option. Families Anonymous offers 12-step fellowship for family and friends around a loved one's drug use or related behavioral challenges. There's also Maranon for peer support for families affected by a loved one's marijuana use. And Hazelton Betty Ford also offers some great programming. They have weekly family support groups, as well as one-day programs that are free, both in English and Spanish, that are specifically for families who have a youth or young adult with a substance use disorder. There's also a variety of other peer support groups for families and friends outside of the 12-step model. So this includes the Family Restored support group in Maine, as well as Parents of Addicted Loved Ones, known as PAL. They have 2 chapters, I believe, one in Bingham and one in Madison. I was trying to get on top of what you guys have in Maine, so I may be missing things. Feel free to put it in the chat if I am. I do want to highlight a resource in Massachusetts called Learn to Cope, which was started by a mom who had a son struggling with addiction. And now Learn to Cope is statewide, offering both in-person and virtual meetings, and people from outside the state can join those virtual meetings. They also have some brick and mortar family peer recovery centers that are now offering year-round activities for families in recovery. So very grateful to the state for supporting this. They also have a really helpful online discussion board and some great resources on things like grief and loss due to substance use, as well as supporting grandparents raising grandchildren as a result of substance use. And one more thing I'll say about Learn to Cope is they have a Spanish-speaking peer recovery group for families, and people come to that, from all over the place. So, Maine is more than welcome to connect with that Spanish group as well. Smart Recovery Family and Friends offers both in-person and virtual meetings based on Smart Recovery and also the CRAFT model. So that's a great resource. The Heron Project also, that's in Massachusetts, but it's for anyone, and they have all kinds of virtual support groups for families impacted by addiction. And NAMI is a great resource for families impacted by a loved one's mental health. So those are just some examples, and there's plenty more. I did just want to highlight grief support groups, grief peer recovery support groups as well, because unfortunately, many families are grieving the loss of a loved one due to substance use. most likely accidental overdose. But, you know, if you're working with bereaved families, please help them connect with a grief support group. Maine has a great list of these groups. I put the first two links on the slide here. You know, NAMI Maine and the other one are both awesome. You guys have a lot of grief support groups in the state, which is great. There's also the Family Restored Support Group in Portland, and they offer a meeting once a month that's virtual as well. And GRASP, which is Grief Recovery After a Substance Passing, it's a national organization. They have a chapter in Augusta. Recovery from Grief is a group that meets in Portland. And I do want to also just highlight that you know, Massachusetts has some helpful resources that you may be able to access as well. SADOD, which stands for Support After a Death by Overdose, is a new organization that is, you know, really, they have a wonderful website with lots of helpful resources. So I definitely recommend checking out their website. And they've partnered with Learn to Cope to offer what's called the Grief Ally Program. So when someone does experience the loss of a loved one due to addiction, they can get kind of like a recovery coach, but it's a grief ally. So it's a one-on-one coach who has lived experience with bereavement in the same way, and they are supporting those who are going through this loss. So it's good to, you know, kind of learn about that and check out those resources. I also just want to highlight that grandparents raising grandchildren are particularly in need of family support. And there's good peer supports out there. So, you know, a lot of times grandparents are raising their grandchildren because their own children are struggling with addiction, or maybe they're in treatment for a while and they're supporting their kids. So, so you can look for these support groups with the link that I put on this slide at the top. And then there's some helpful resources that you could share with families, you know, who have grandparents raising grandchildren. All right, the next tool in our toolbox is outpatient family services. So there are several outpatient family practices that are evidence-based, and they are supporting families while also reducing youth substance use. So there are two family outpatient models that are now available in Maine, from my understanding. So one is called multisystemic therapy, and the other one is ACRA, or the Adolescent Community Reinforcement Approach. So I've highlighted those because they are available, and I'll talk more about them in a moment. The other three on the slide are multidimensional family therapy, ARISE, and brief strategic family therapy. So these are all evidence-based. And you know, each of these models focuses on both the individual, so the young person, but also the whole family's recovery and healing. They are trying to remove the shame, the blame, and the guilt, while also helping family members to learn coping skills, build their resiliency, strengthen connection with each other. And they're, you know, available in the outpatient setting, so that's really important. So I'm not going to get, just in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into detail about multisystemic therapy, but you have the information here. You know, it's really focused on decreasing the problematic behaviors and other clinical issues, and increasing the parent's ability to, you know, handle those challenges. I believe that Anita Hood is the contact, and there's a link here so you can check out where those services are provided in Maine. I'm going to just highlight the ACRA program because I'm really familiar with this model. This stands for the Adolescent Community Reinforcement Approach. And in Massachusetts, we have a whole network of providers who are now trained in this, and we're able to offer ACRA programs across the state. So ACRA is and you guys also have some in Maine as well. So I have those on the next slide. So that's exciting that Maine is, you know, building up their ACRA capacity. You know, ACRA is designed to, it's a brief treatment program for young people, typically ages 12 to 24, who, you know, may need support at any stage of, you know, of their substance use or recovery. And it's designed to work with both the young person and the family members. The goal really is to help the young people create a lifestyle that is more rewarding than using substances. So they're very focused on promoting positive social activities, positive peer relationships, and improved relationships with family members, as well as teaching coping skills and life skills with the youth and the families around problem solving, communication, conflict resolution. They do role play, and they have sessions that are just with the youth, and then sessions just with the families, with the parents or caregivers, and then together. So it's a great model. And you guys have some of these services currently available. Um, so this is a listing of what I understand is happening. So, so there's that. And, finally, I think it's really important to encourage everyone, providers and families alike, to keep getting educated about addiction, to help advocate for changes to improve how we can, best support young people with substance use disorders and their families. So, you can share these resources with families. On the national level, there's lots of organizations that can help keep you up to date on information and other resources. So some of these include NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, also SAMHSA. I really want to highlight again the Partnership to End Addiction. I do have one slide on them coming up. I don't, I just have found them to be very helpful, and they really make it accessible for parents and other family members with toolkits and guides and things that are designed specifically for families. NADAC, the National Association for Addiction Professionals, is a helpful organization for providers to learn more, as well as, they have a whole series of free webinars. And, families may want to also go to some webinars and learn more. I don't have it on this slide, but for youth and marijuana, I highly recommend Johnny's Ambassadors. That is a great website to get. They have a ton of webinars also, but other information around marijuana and youth. I put Faces and Voices of Recovery here because I do want to just remind folks of the importance of advocacy and helping. A lot of times when families really want to make, they get more involved, they get more insight, they also want to help others. And so, we can help connect them with those organizations doing advocacy work. At the local level, you may have substance use prevention coalitions they can get involved with, or opioid task forces. And Faces and Voices of Recovery is a national group that does that. Again, Partnership to End Addiction, just a link here, just reminding folks that you can share this with families. And, I do have a couple other resources here on this page, how to navigate treatment, some guidebooks. So yeah, there's just so much to learn on this topic. And I really appreciate you guys taking time today to focus on this. I wanted to make sure that we had time at the end for Q&A. So I am going to thank you for being here and for all the hard work you're doing and for making a difference. This is my contact information if you want to reach out to me to follow up on anything. So I will stop my share and we'll open up the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much. If you can keep that up as well, so folks have
Oh,
your
you want me to keep
email.
it? I can
Yeah,
do
if you don't mind, so
that.
folks can just jot down your phone number
I'll
and your
step
email for
back. I'll get
contact.
that. Okay. There you
Thank
go.
you so much, Jordana. That was absolutely amazing. So many great resources that you were able to share with us, and folks were chatting in the chat about some others that are available in Maine as well. Really love to see everyone kind of coming together and sharing those resources so folks can get connected. There's some love in the chat for the peer services as well as harm reduction. So we do have one question in the chat or in the Q&A box, just talking about in your experience, what some of the successful methods of treating secondary trauma would be.
Mm. Okay, so trauma treatment is a really big topic. There's different evidence-based models around trauma treatment, and I think finding for family members, if they can access an outpatient provider who can use things like trauma-focused CBT, there's EMDR. There's different types of trauma treatment that can be helpful, and that is, I would say, a big topic. I know the National Child Traumatic Stress Network is a great resource for trauma treatment for youth, and they also those evidence-based programs that they talk about can also they are applicable to family members. I think if you want to reach out to me, I can send a more comprehensive listing of trauma resources. But secondary trauma, it, it is it can be treated the same way as PTSD, and so providers working in that field can help with that.
Thank you so much. That person that put that question said they will reach out to you, and they just a thank you for that. Another question, just relating to some insurance. I know that's kind of a challenging topic in some ways, but if there's any movements to advocate for insurances to cover some of these services.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, we're still, I think this is a newer area. Like I mentioned, families have been the forgotten clients, and we definitely need to do more and build it into health insurance to cover these services. I think the outpatient family services that I was mentioning, multisystemic therapy and the adolescent community reinforcement approach are working with the family members and with the youth. There's I tried to provide things that also are free, so the peer recovery supports are so important. But yeah, it is definitely getting parity for families is something that we're still working towards. And that's what advocacy organizations are doing, trying to bring this to light. But I think the more we can, encourage our state officials and others to focus on families, the more, a lot of times it does come down to the state supporting those where health insurance is falling through the cracks for people. But it is a challenge, and we do need to do more for sure.
Thank you so much. There is a question in the chat, and I'm not sure who put that question in there, but just asking if you could post some of the acronyms. I'm just not sure which ones that they're referring to, so maybe they could reach out to you if they had any specific questions on some of those. I did catch one question in the chat. If it stays still for me as I read through it, what is your perspective on youth utilizing MOUD? And are there any resources you recommend for families to get accurate information on the pros and cons regarding the decision? That might be a very large topic for 5 minutes that we have left, but if you want to just touch a little bit on that.
Right. So MOUD, that is an acronym. So that's medications for opioid use disorder. And when I mentioned there are many pathways to recovery, one of those is medications. And for opioid use disorder, it really is considered the gold standard to use medications in combination with therapy and other supports. So methadone is approved for ages 18 and up. Suboxone is approved for ages 16 and up. And naltrexone is also 18 and up. So I think for young people, it is definitely young people who have an opioid use disorder, you definitely want to consider it. And it can be really helpful to engage people in the recovery process. The brain is really hijacked with an opioid use disorder, and what the medications are doing, just like other prescribed medications, are helping to regulate the brain chemistry so people can engage in treatment. There's still a lot of stigma around medications for recovery. So, I think young people are, also, can benefit from that as long as there is also the counseling and the supports around it.
Thank you so much. There's actually two questions that are fairly similar. What, in your experience, what are some of the best ways to be able to reach youth, to be able to support them and their family members with SUD?
Ooh, that's a really big question too for a short time. When you say reach them, like engage with them, try and engage them in treatment.
Yeah, there's just another comment that says, as we know, they're out in our communities and sometimes can be challenging to reach them.
Yeah, so, again, harm reduction is so important, meeting people where they're at, developing relationships with them. I mentioned motivational interviewing. I just really want to highlight that, as that is the evidence-based best practice that we have for engaging people in substance use treatment. And it really highlights a few aspects. One is partnering with the person in a therapeutic alliance, really honoring their autonomy. The more people feel empowered, the more they can find their own motivation from within. um, Acceptance is part of it, a lot of compassion and empowerment. And I think when you start to learn motivational interviewing, you can really, find some wonderful ways to engage. But it's, a lot of it is the relationship, and it takes time, and there's stages of change. So meeting people wherever they're at, pre-contemplation is a stage of change, and it can, it can change. They can start to contemplate and move into taking action. So
Thank you so, so much.
yeah.
It does look like that's the end of the questions in the Q&A. So there was
I
some,
had one for
oh,
Jordana.
go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for a comprehensive presentation. It's wonderful. In your travels, what have you recognized as practices that people do on a daily basis to facilitate the process of recovery and change?
Um, so maybe be more specific. You mean practices for family
Yeah,
recovery?
besides all the resources, what are they actually, what do you see people doing that helps them? Meditation, exercise, like
Okay.
what are we really, what are the activities that people are engaging in that help?
Yeah. Yeah, well, when we're supporting families in recovery, we're really trying to help them help their loved one, but also helping them with their own self-care. So I did use the metaphor of the oxygen mask because, a lot of times family members are so stressed out and so traumatized that they're not focusing on their own coping skills. So there's a parallel process here, and I think as providers, as professionals, and as family members ourselves, because so many of us are personally affected by this, a lot of what we can do is role model what we are hoping for our young people, that they can tolerate distress, that they can have healthy coping skills. And what does that mean for folks? How do we calm our own nervous systems? And I think for everyone, that's a little different. We know that things like mindfulness-based stress reduction can work. We know that DBT practices like there's some really great evidence-based models out there, but also there's a lot of expressive therapies that people use for themselves: time in nature, yoga, time with pets, art, music, dance. There's so many things that people can connect with that calm their nervous system, help them regulate, really connecting with others, learning how to not feel so alone, and process your own emotions, because a lot of what we're dealing with addiction is a lot of emotional pain, and using the substance use, it becomes the form of coping. And so how we can role model other healthier strategies is really important. And people, I don't know, that's such a huge topic. And I really, I will say for all of you here today, self-care is so important as providers. There's a lot of turnover in the field of addiction with our own workforce. And I think a lot of that is burnout too. So, the compassion fatigue families face, there's a parallel kind of process with providers. So the more we can do to take care of ourselves, take the breaks when we need it, try to find the balance, is also critical. So, all of you are such caregivers. We also have to turn some of that compassion, to ourselves. I don't know if that's answering your question, but yeah, there's a lot of great strategies out there. So feel free to reach out to me. So separately, I can send more resources.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, Jordana. I really appreciate, and we really appreciate you coming today and chatting with us, sharing resources. It's been really great to see the conversations happening in the chat as well with the participants. So thank you all for joining us. I know we're a minute over, but really wanted to make sure we got that last bit in there. We look forward to seeing you all in November. And this webinar is recorded and will be posted on the AdCare website within the upcoming weeks. So thank you all so much. And thanks to AdCare for hosting us today. We look forward to seeing you all again soon. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate getting time with all of you. So have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.